Comfy chairs.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Koonce, and I am fortunate to be the president and artistic director of the Gateways Music Festival. Thank you. Wow. Thanks very much. I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished panelists this morning and want to express my appreciation for your time, for your expertise, and the experiences that you will share with us this morning. Over the past couple of years, there's been a reinvigorated, I guess I would call it, conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field of concert music, in the field of classical music. And everyone appears to acknowledge that strengthening the pipeline is one of the most important ways for us to achieve this goal and promote this effort. In this morning's session, we're going to hear from some of our colleagues about their work. Most of them, their work focuses on multiple levels of the pipeline, but this morning we're going to focus really on one particular area of their pipeline, kind of going from the beginning, youngest ages, and then advancing. Instead of focusing on actual program content, which you'll hear a little bit about, we really want to talk about access into a certain part of the pipeline, and then how young musicians exit that part of the pipeline and then move to another area. And before we start, I wanted to say that this panel and many others in the field have been examining the word pipeline. And many folks believe that it has a very formulaic sound, and it sounds as though there's just kind of one way to achieve this goal along the pathway. And so the word that many of us are using and interchangeably using is pathway, which defines, it makes it seem as though it is a more individual journey and that it is more customizable and that there are different routes that people enter and exit that particular pathway. So you'll hear us use those terms kind of interchangeably. In preparation for this meeting, we've allotted each panelist 5 minutes to talk about their work and in the entering and exiting the part of the pathway that they'll discuss. And at the end, we'll leave as much time. We're going to try to leave at least 15 or 20 minutes for audience engagement. We know that many of you are very involved in many aspects of the pathway, and we want to hear from you. Well, let's begin. All right. As it turns out, the person who was going to speak about the earliest part of the pipeline is caught in Boston in the snow. Myran Parker Brass is unable to be with us today, but Myran is the head of arts programming for the Boston Public Schools. And she's been a force for access and opportunity in the Boston public school system, and especially in the early years, the programs that she has helped develop and led the development of have become models for city school systems around the country. So instead of beginning with Myran, we're going to begin with Walter, who taught in the public schools for many years, and he can give us some insight into that part of the pathway and then lead into his current work. But before Walter begins, I wanted to say a couple of things, and I think we're all going to say something about this early stage of the pipeline, the public school part of the pipeline. Many of us believe that public school instrumental music instruction is key to access and opportunity for all. And it's key to us achieving significant diversity within the field amongst performers, but also audiences alike. And while our wonderful community music schools and El Sistema programs and other community-based initiatives are critical and essential and important, the ability that public schools have, especially in urban environments, to reach children of Latino and African descent is enormous. So many of us believe and feel and are working toward, throughout this country and in our own local areas, reinstatement of public music programs in our cities. So with that, I'd like to introduce Walter Bittner from the Nashville Symphony Orchestra, who will talk about his program. Walter.
Thank you, Lee. So I'm Walter Bittner, and I think before I start talking about our Cello Rondo program, which is the the focus of my talk this morning. I'd like to just talk about my own path a little bit because it is definitely not a pipeline journey. I was a boy soprano, and I also began studying piano when I was 7, and I studied piano and conducting in undergrad. I played both classical and jazz piano, and then when I was in my 20s, I got involved in early music performance, and I was an early music professional on lute and recorder until I was in my late 30s. I started teaching when I was in my 20s, pretty much as a way to have a steady income as I was married and starting a family. And I taught in private schools in metropolitan New York City and Tampa, Florida, and then eventually in Nashville, where I settled in 2003. I taught vocal and instrumental music, theater, and traditional dance in those schools, and the bulk of my work was teaching choir and strings in K through 8. And then from 2008 to 2014, I worked at Nashville School of the Arts, which is the public arts magnet high school in Nashville. And I, in succession, directed the school's piano performance program, and then I was the choir director and the orchestra director there. And I also taught music theory and chamber music. In 2007, I founded a private independent youth orchestra in Nashville with my friend Tracy Silverman. That some of the string players in the audience may know Tracy. And I ran that for 5 years. And this year, I left the organization in 2012, but they're celebrating their 10th anniversary this year. And I started working at the Nashville Symphony in 2014. And since I began there, in addition to my work as an administrator, I've been writing and publishing about music and education on my blog Off the Podium at walterbittner.com. When I started working at the Symphony, our CEO, Alan Valentine, asked me in my very first week on the job what I was going to do about diversity in the Symphony programming specifically. So after a lot of conversations with a lot of people, we began to craft a program for students of color to try to provide opportunities that they would not otherwise have access to. And you know, out of my experience in the public school system, I had met many students of color who had tremendous talent, but did not have the economic resources or the opportunities or even the cultural understanding in the communities they grew up in about how to pursue, or even that it was a possibility that they could pursue a career in the arts. We were very lucky in that Nashville is relatively close to Atlanta, and the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra has a program called the Talent Development Program there, and which is now in their 23rd year. And Adrian Thompson, who's the director of that program, has been a very great friend of the program, and I would really like to recognize Adrian. He's sitting right here. Please, Adrian. So she has really been a great mentor and guide as we crafted this program and got it off the ground. So Cello Rondo is a program designed to prepare students of color to have success as professional classical musicians. And one of the things that we first really kind of discussed very deeply was who would be eligible for the program. Nashville is a very diverse city. It's one of the country's fastest growing city. There are about 2,000 people a month moving to Nashville. It's become a haven for refugees and immigrants. We have the largest Kurdish population in the country, the largest Somali population in the country. So our students come from underrepresented communities in American professional orchestras, which is it's a lot of legal wording to describe basically everybody who's not white or of North Asian descent, because those ethnicities are well represented in American orchestras. And so the spectrum of ethnicities among our students right now includes the Black, Latina, Vietnamese, Pakistani, and Syrian students, and we expect that it will grow even more diverse as our program grows. These are our first class of Cello Rondo students who entered the program in September, and when we started building the program, we really looked out to our community for help and resources. We only have a certain amount of facility space at the hall, but we also realized that we couldn't just, as the Symphony was not capable of building a program that would be responsive to all of our community without input from them. So we've had great luck with our partners at Blair School of Music at Vanderbilt in our planning discussions for the program in 2015. Conexión Americas, which is an immigrant assimilation nonprofit that helps people who are new to the country and new to the area in all aspects of assimilating to American culture. Metro Nashville Public Schools Music Makes Us, which has one of the more visible music education efforts in the country, and Choral Arts Link, which is run by Margaret Campbell Holman, who's the most prominent African-American music educator in our community. All of these partners helped inform our decisions about how to shape the curriculum, the philosophy, and the policies of the program. And we were very, very fortunate to receive funding by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for 75% of our budgeted expenses over the first 6 years of the rollout of the program to our full enrollment, which we hope will be 24 students by 2020. And our corporate partner, Nissan, this year just recently shifted their funding emphasis for the Symphony over to education, over excitement for this program. So what our students actually receive is a comprehensive suite of activities that are designed to help them win admission to music school. And they include private lessons with Nashville Symphony musicians every week, which is kind of the cornerstone of the program, participation in their school band and orchestra, participation in a community youth orchestra, music theory classes. They attend classical series concerts at the Symphony. We have juries and advisory meetings twice a year to make sure that they're still fulfilling the requirements of the program, and also to sort of counsel and help them with any challenges or struggles that they're facing. And they're participating in competitions, attending summer camps. This summer, some of our students will be going to summer camp. We have family meetings every month. And when our students are juniors and seniors, we'll be providing transportation and coordination for them to visit prospective teachers that they'll be auditioning for college. All of this is provided to the students and their families free of cost. So there are some challenges. We're very new in the program. We just started with our first class this year, and we'll be auditioning for our second class in 3 weeks, where I'll be adding 5 more students this year. But already certain issues have come up. Nashville does not have a good mass transit infrastructure. And so for some of our families, transportation is a difficulty to get to all these activities around the city. Also, we found that there are really three kind of things that are crucial for our students to be successful. One is their native talent, their native musical aptitude. One is just as important, their motivation to work hard. And the third is their family support, their support network and infrastructure. And whereby we can provide some of that, some of it is very important that it does come from the family. Another challenge we faced is spreading an understanding in the community of what kind of program this is. It's not an enrichment program just to provide extra lessons for students who are good at music. It's actually a career preparedness program. There's nothing like it in our community, and maybe not in our state. So we've had to spend a lot of time educating people about it. It's not a needs-based program. There's no financial information required or examined when they apply. And it does discriminate on ethnicity, which also people are not necessarily used to encountering. So we've been building friends and volunteers slowly, and that's one at a time, talking to people, making relationships. We've worked with our partners to gain spaces for our programming, and we're the first department at the Nashville Symphony to disseminate all our materials in Spanish as well as English, to remove barriers of access. So the last thing I'd like to do before I pass it on to Sarah here is just to recognize, this can't ever happen in a vacuum. My entire staff is here at Sphinx. So Kelly Bell, our program manager, Kristen Freeman, our department coordinator, and Kimberly McLemore, who is now the manager of this program, are all here. And I think they're back there in the corner.
Let's give them a shout out.
Yeah. And so we really hope that this program will be successful in the next 5 to 10 years in putting musicians from underrepresented communities on the stages of orchestras around the country.
Thank you so much, Walter. Sarah Johnson is director of the Weill Institute at Carnegie Hall, and she'll tell us about one of her signature programs. So, Sarah.
Thanks, Lee. Good morning, everyone. So at Carnegie Hall, we launched the National Youth Orchestra of the USA 5 years ago. We're having our 5th summer this summer. And when we launched NYO, we wanted it to represent the US. The idea was to have the National Youth Orchestra. We wanted it to be as representative of this country as it possibly could be. And we knew there were going to be certain challenges around that, but we were thinking about that in every step of the way, trying to remove barriers to participation, trying to provide as much access as we could, trying to make it as easy as possible for young people to find out about the opportunity, et cetera. And yet we saw in the first couple of years, as more and more young people found out about NYO, we saw a narrowing of the pool of places from which young people were successfully getting into the orchestra. So we saw that the really big youth orchestras across the country were producing more and more of the participants to NYO, largely because those students had access to extraordinary opportunities and to a great peer group, to great instruction, et cetera. And we didn't want to allow that to be the case. We continue to aspire to have NYO USA become more representative of this country. And so we launched last summer NYO 2, which is a program for younger students, and really with a focus on populations that are underrepresented in the orchestral world. We did a couple of things differently in NYO2 to try to invite the young people we were looking for into that program. The first is that the staff spent a huge amount of time on the phone, talking to folks all over the country and trying to find young people who would be appropriate and who would benefit from this program. And so we went out through the usual networks, of course, to youth orchestras, to community music schools, to state music education folks, to arts councils and commissions. But then when we heard about an extraordinary string teacher in a rural community, we actually chased that person and got on the phone and talked about this opportunity and have really built a very robust database of contacts for people who are in touch with young instrumentalists who would be good for NYO2. The other thing that we did was to put a nomination process in place. And we think that this was key from what we can tell anyway. So you had to be nominated to apply. And what that meant is that young people would hear from somebody in their community, maybe a teacher, maybe somebody at school, it could be a church leader, it could be any number of people who filled out a very simple form and basically were saying to that young person, I think this would be a great thing for you. And then those young musicians heard from somebody at Carnegie Hall saying, hey, you've been nominated for NYO2. Are you planning to apply? Is there anything we can do? Do you have any questions? How can we support you in feeling like you're ready to apply and hopefully successfully apply? And we met young people in last year's program who could have gotten into NYO USA, but we'd never heard from them. And so we think that there might be something in this nomination piece that young instrumentalists have seen really that this is for them and that they are invited and welcomed into this program. We're only going into our second year this summer for NYO2. So we're definitely still in a learning phase. And one of the things we're really interested in, of course, is once we've made this investment, so this is a summer program, NYO and NYO2 run next to each other. The young people have a lot of contact with each other. They share faculty. NYO2 also has a special relationship with the Philadelphia Orchestra and gets a lot of time with musicians from Philadelphia. There's a side-by-side performance with the Philadelphia Orchestra for NYO2. This summer, NYO2 is performing at Carnegie Hall for the first time. So the program is definitely evolving and growing, and we will learn more. This summer, we've just done the selection process for both orchestras for the summer of 2017, and we have 10 NYO2 participants from last year who have gotten into NYO USA this year, which is exciting because part of the goal is to help transition young people into NYO USA and then beyond that into conservatories. And we're excited to see that early positive result. But we're also thinking a lot about what other pieces could be put in place to continue to support these young musicians as they aspire to have lives in music. So thinking about the mentorship piece, thinking about either relationships with maybe members of NYO who are just that slightly older peer group, or perhaps relationships and mentorship relationships with professional musicians who are currently in orchestras around the country. So we're still thinking about those pieces, but that's where we are in the process so far.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Sure.
Next, John Kieser, who's from the New World Symphony and is Executive Vice President and Provost. John?
Thank you, Lee. Hello, everyone. So, skipped over a couple slides. Hang on for a second here. We'll just go back. So, what I'm going to do is to just go through some slides quickly here. I believe they're available on the Sphinx website, so you can go back and read them at your leisure, but I want to also move to an initiative that we are launching in the very near future to talk about the issues, or we'll speak to some of the issues about the pipeline, or one specific point in that pipeline. So New World Symphony, we're almost 30 years old, 29 years this year. We are a postgraduate training academy for musicians who are planning to go into orchestras and ensembles. We're looking to train the leaders of these orchestras of the future. And we're also a laboratory that is pushing the boundaries in terms of education and in artistic expression, both in the concert hall and online. So with that sort of overall, that means you don't have to read this, and it will be available later. So I'm going to go right past it. Sorry, not enough time. So the curriculum in the New World is in sort of three areas: the performance and musicianship, there is audience and community engagement, and entrepreneurship. What that looks like, and we've got our little 4 E's there at the top. What that looks like in the performance and musicianship, and it's a fellowship, so it's a 3-year fellowship. They're with us for that period of time, or sometimes they leave a lot sooner because they actually get jobs. Yay, that's what we want them to do. When a fellow comes and they say, talking about orchestra, blah, 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 maybe I want to do this and this, I said, first and foremost, your excellence as a performer is going to be your platform. It's going to be your credibility. So really is a huge emphasis on this, and you can see the various pieces. We don't have a resident faculty. We have all visiting faculty. We bring in about 120 different members of orchestras and specialty areas every year. And we're able to actually cater that to the feedback from the fellows as well as what we see is happening out in the field. I think that's a really key point about New World, is that we like to retain that nimbleness, that adaptability, so to be able to react to what's happening out there. The community and audience engagement, extremely important. We want our fellows to be as comfortable in front of an audience performing the instrument, or talking to an audience, or actually on the phone talking to a donor saying thank you, or being in a classroom with a bunch of grade 3s, probably the toughest audience they'll ever have. So the last part of it is what we call entrepreneurship, and really actually this is about leadership, it's about professional development, to have them understand when they are in the orchestra something about the business of music, how they can actually also launch their own initiative. A number of these fellows have gone on to launch their own groups, to innovate within their orchestras. So that is also very, very important to be able to have that sort of that language of not only music, but also language of the business of music. They also have the opportunity to do or to mount various their own performances that vary from involving the whole orchestra down to a small ensemble to community engagement programs. They're very much involved in designing those as well too. So I want to focus on one particular aspect, which is audition training. So the League published recently a 12-year retrospective on the situation of how the composition of orchestras in America. So if you look at that study, it shows that 12 years ago, 1.8% of the orchestra's population was African American, 1.8% was Hispanic. Come forward to 2014, Hispanic went from 1.8 to 2.5%. African American, 1.8 to 1.8. The needle did not move. So this got us thinking at New World, as well as Stanford Thompson, who was visiting us at that time. We started the conversation. What that resulted in was 2 convenings at New World and also participation in the work at the League convention last June. What came out of, and I'm going to actually, okay, we've talked about pipeline, we've talked about pathways, we're going to throw another one on the table. And this is actually an invention of Stanford Thompson. We call it the bridge. And the bridge is made up of spans. And each span is a part of a musician's career that starts from when they first pick up an instrument to when they actually get tenure in an orchestra. Each span is supported by a peer. What happens, and as Stanford said this morning in an earlier session, there are exit ramps at each one of these spans. And what can we do to make sure that musicians from underrepresented communities aren't taking those exit ramps? So there's our fellowship, and we're definitely looking at how we can try and bring a more diverse group of fellows into the fellowship. But when we started looking at this, one of the key points was audition preparation. So what you're seeing on the screen in front of you is the sort of the elements. We also realized that mentorship is very important. So in a session at 8:30 this morning, we were talking to a group of you about something, we're calling it a National Mentoring and Audition Training Institute. This would, and it's still under design, the goal is to have this up and running by at least a pilot project by this summer. And what it seeks to do is to give that sort of training and mentoring necessary to take people from one span to the other across that pier from, initially, we're looking at sort of the end of their conservatory or their school of music training into a professional job. But really, auditions are part of life. It was definitely of mine as a musician. We're always, doing auditions of one side or another. So what we learn from this, we think is going to be applicable to everybody taking auditions. So, there's more about that actually on the website. The entire bridge plan, which was an outcome of the second convening, is also on the Sphinx website. It's attached to this actual this session here. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you all. Sarah, go ahead.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
I realized I was thinking so much about the in and the out that I forgot to say one important statistic, which is that just to say a little bit about the makeup of NYO2 last year, we did not set quotas, but where we basically landed for that orchestra from a race and ethnicity perspective was in quarters. That about a quarter of that orchestra was African American, a quarter Latino, a quarter Asian, and a quarter Caucasian. That's just what happened. And it has roughly happened again in this year's selection. So I think that's really interesting and speaks to the 2 pieces I was talking about earlier, the nomination piece and the networking piece nationally.
And I think that's critical. That personal engagement that you talked about a minute ago, I think really makes a difference.
Yeah, I agree.
And so one of the questions that just got slipped to me before we open up more broadly was about the cost of your program. So Walter, you've talked about your program being completely free and open access. What about NYO and NYO2, and then what about New World? Can you tell us about that, Sarah?
Yes, NYO is totally free. There's a $30 application fee for NYO, which we will waive. There isn't even an application fee for NYO2. It's also completely free. With those programs, if young people are able to get themselves to New York and home, on their own, then that's great. But if they aren't, we cover all of those costs. So there's literally zero cost to families.
So you're removing barriers.
Indeed.
Any barriers that appear
Yes,
removed.
in both programs.
In both. That's
Yep.
terrific.
Okay.
John?
In New Worlds, the fellowship program, fellows receive a $500 a week stipend, they receive housing, and there's no tuition. And there's also some assistance in travel of getting to and from Miami. On the Namadi program, we're also contemplating that there's going to be at no cost to the participant. So in our initial budgets, we're also budgeting for the for travel, for housing, and as I said, no tuition as well.
And the beautiful weather is free.
Well, yes. Yeah. Now this might happen in summer, so weather.
That's another matter
Personally,
altogether.
I love 100-degree weather and 99% humidity, but it may not be to everybody's. But fortunately, usually air conditioning works.
So before we open to the floor, I'd like to ask, thank our amazing panel. So thank you very much. Thank you for your comments about your programs and talking about the challenges and your opportunities. Can you describe or tell us about another program other than yours around the country that you think is a good model for getting into and access and opportunity to the pathway, to the bridge, to the pipeline? Sarah, would you like to start?
Sure. This is a program that we've seen be hugely successful as we have been recruiting for NYO2 and NYO USA, which is the percussion fellowship program that is run in Chicago.
Symphony, absolutely.
That is an amazing, amazing program, and it recruits young people in at a pretty early age and provides very robust support, both in terms of instruction and also family engagement. They are doing
This is Patsy Dass's program. Yeah. If you haven't seen the program, it's run by the Chicago Symphony. I think it was founded by Patsy and her husband Doug. And
yes.
if you just look at online at the YouTube videos and you see these kids playing, it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
There's really nothing like it.
Fantastic
It's a wonderful
program.
example. John, do you?
So I would like, because one of our concerns here is also what we call the fifth part of the bridge, which is the professional life. So we've been looking, I've actually spent some time with one program at Chicago Symphony. There we go, Chicago again.
My hometown. Woohoo.
No, exactly. Well, it's all happening in Chicago. So.
Everything revolves around Chicago.
So they have it's fellowships, but they really are quite robust in terms of not only musicians playing in the orchestra, but also administrators, and also very important, they have a fellowship for conductors. Because if you look at this, if you want to try and treat this holistically, you really need those. It's like, three branches of the government that hopefully those work very well right now. But anyhow, sorry, that's my last
Another
moment.
example, maybe?
Exactly. But really, you need to have all three of those levers working well, I think, to create that fifth part of what we call the bridge, which is the professional life. So like
Nice.
Chicago Symphony,
Nice.
New York Philharmonic also has a program that gives these musicians actual experience in an orchestra, because it's a whole different world going from even something like New World, which is fairly intense, but into a professional orchestra. And that kind of experience, I think, is invaluable. I'd like to see a lot more orchestras take that up and do something similar.
Perfect. Walter, do you have any?
I think there are a lot of programs around the country who are doing valuable work in preparing students for the pathways. I want to speak a little bit about the elementary school programs because Myra wasn't able to be here, and I think in our country the public education system is abandoning responsibility for music education, especially for these youngest students in an atmosphere where standardized testing has become the sort of most important thing that the school systems focus on. And so it's the responsibility of the other arts organizations in our culture to begin to address this, or that very important period of time in a child's life when they're most able to quickly assimilate musical skills will be completely bypassed, and many students miss the opportunity to do that vital work at an early age. So I think at this conference, there are many El Sistema educators who are working in this part of the field, and the work they're doing is invaluable, not just for the possibility of identifying the students who will go on to our parts of the pathways, but also just to bring music to everybody. And I think that model of music education being taken up by people who are not part of the public school system to make up for what's not happening is just so important.
It's an extraordinary, great work going on around the country. Thank you. So with that, let's open up the panel to some questions. I think I see some of you heading toward the mic, and yes.
Go Gigi.
And please introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
My name is Chichi Nwanoku. I'm from London, and I'm the founder and artistic and executive director of Chineke Foundation. Thank you very much for this presentation. I wanted to ask Sarah a couple of things, and that's regarding at last there is a program for the youth of America, and I'm actually on the board of the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain. And when I first joined that board 9 years ago, the orchestra was made up of young people from the ages of 11 to 18, mostly who are coming from the very posh, expensive private schools and boarding schools. And that represented the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain, and the standard is incredibly high. Something like 93% of the children in the orchestra came from the private schools, yet about 93% of the schools in the United Kingdom are the state schools. So the contrast was very extreme. We've had to work very, very hard to try and get some kind of sensible balance where children who go to the state schools feel that that orchestra is representing them and that they can even begin to think to apply for that orchestra. The NYO, what we've done, we've created something like your NYO2, but it's called NYO Inspire. And what it does, it uses members of the NYO Orchestra to actually go into all of the state schools and start to, so it's peer education, peer-to-peer, and the result has been really quite spectacular. The other thing there's a couple of notes that I've made that I think are very, very important to us professionals as well as the juniors, and that is relevance. How relevant is classical music in anyone's lives? And if we don't see anything that represents us in our education at school, then we wonder why it is relevant in our lives. Now, we have so many people in our history who composed music, who performed music throughout whatever struggle and history they had, but we don't hear or see enough of them. They are there, let us use them. Let's make that part of the resource that we use. And I know for a fact that, there's a room full of people here who are dedicated to classical music. Every single person here is an advocate that can go into all of the schools, that can be used as part of the program, because you cannot underestimate a visual role model. And I really think that's seriously has a big impression.
We've got some other folks in line. Do you have a question for Sarah? You were going to ask a question, I think.
Yes, well, it was just talking about the relevance and also also going to the schools rather than making people to make a very, very long journey to New York. The NYO, we're a much smaller country than you, I know, but we actually go to all of the different environments and really get a feel for each environment and then go into their schools.
Yeah, so I would just say that this is a small slice of the work of the Weill Music Institute, and our schools-based work around the country and in some cases internationally is reaching about 370,000 young people at the moment. So we are also deeply dedicated to that side of things, and I agree with you completely. That is so important. And it also relates to the elementary school side of the whole beginning of pathways. Where are young people having the chance to engage with music? Frankly, I would say of all types, including classical music, but across genres. Where do they have the chance to be supported as participants in a variety of ways? And then to start to think about what that might mean for them in their lives. I think that part is huge. Seeing role models who look like them, who have shared experiences is essential. and yeah, just
And
totally.
playing music that's written by them.
Written, right,
Absolutely,
exactly.
absolutely.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Gigi. Ariel?
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Ariel. I'm with the Kennedy Center Community Engagement Manager. And I just want to say thank you to you all. This is incredibly important work, and it's new work, so I recognize that there are a lot of challenges in play here. The question that I have is, while we're building these programs, I'm curious if there's any concentrated effort being made within the communities in which these young people will be entering, any diversity training sessions, racism training, things of that nature. I was hoping to hear a bit about that.
Who would like to address
I mean,
that?
I can just say that, yeah, that is part of our programming. We will be hosting cultural sensitivity and unconscious bias training for our musicians and staff at the Symphony in the next couple months for the first time, and it's an ongoing part of our budget and our plan as the program grows and we have more people involved to continue to do that. Yes.
Terrific. Sarah?
Yeah, that's true for us as well. We, in the Weill Music Institute for the last 18 months or so, we've been working with a consultant to help support conversations about questions of unconscious bias, racism, thinking about doing this work as a big cultural institution that can be perceived as having enormous privilege and power, does have enormous privilege and power. How do we handle that? How do we think about the work that we do in relationship to that? And how do we support our staff and the artists with whom we're working to develop more sensitivity and to understand the issues around bias?
Terrific.
And for New World, we're just beginning that journey, to be quite honest. What we've realized is that the effectiveness of whatever program that we come up with will be hampered unless there is greater understanding and greater skills within the staff and the board of New World. So we're actually at this point looking for particular resources to help us through that journey.
Good question. Thanks, Ariel. Maya, I think you've got a question?
Hi, I'm Maya Weill from the DC Youth Orchestra program in Washington, D.C. And we have 600 kids from the age of 5 up to college learning music. 80% are of color. We do find, as I think Walter said, that the big challenge for many families is transportation. And so our program mainly happens on Saturday, but we've also expanded into 4 Title I schools where we're teaching an El Sistema-inspired program, and we're funding 100% of that cost. But the schools, it's branded as their program. And so one of the challenges I have in fundraising is, how do you talk about this big program with all the 8 orchestras and kids on a Saturday versus a slightly different focus program in the elementary schools?
Anyone like to address that? I think Walter.
I think one of the things that there's a lot of optimism at the Symphony, at Nashville Symphony, for enthusiasm in our community for bringing music to young people, and so I think that, though I don't have any hard answers about where to find it, it's definitely been my experience that this is something that there's a bulwark of grassroots support for, and people, if you can especially get the children in front of people who are the potential donors, it's really and just kind of trust in your work. I think that you'll find a pathway. It may not be the pipeline that you expect to be going on, but you'll find a pathway.
Have you talked to DeLugue Smith at San Diego Youth Symphony? I would recommend talking to DeLugue, who runs San Diego Youth and has been unbelievably successful in collaboration with the Chula Vista School District in helping them to start an El Sistema-inspired program which San Diego Youth supported and paid for at the beginning, but made it clear that they wouldn't be able to sustain it forever. And the school district has taken on those costs. The entire school district has committed to instrumental instruction now in Chula Vista. Now they're working on the San Diego district. He's been super, super successful, really strategic thinker, and might be a good person for you to talk to.
And it's an example, I think, of systemic change,
great
which I think
example.
we're really looking for. John,
And
we only
just-
have a couple more minutes. So
Yeah, okay, so just quickly
I wanna get
also,
your-
I can connect you with somebody afterwards, because on our community engagement programs, believe me, transportation was a huge issue, but don't give up on the school district, because we were actually able to find somebody, well, Alberto Cavallo, who actually runs that whole Miami-Dade County, and made him an advocate for this, and then basically they came on board to help with this. So I can connect with somebody in our organization who helped that happen.
Great. Thanks, Maya. Yes.
Hi, I'm Willie Sullivan. I work for the University Musical Society in Ann Arbor.
Hey.
And my question, I want to kind of make an analogy similar to collegiate athletes that go to a major university to play basketball or football or something like that. The majority of them do not go on to the NFL, the NBA, the MLB. And I feel like in classical music, it's similar. A lot of children start out studying classical music, and they do things like NYO, and then eventually they don't either, for multiple reasons, do not become members of the New York Philharmonic or the Chicago Symphony. We have a very large issue in this industry of the performing arts. I work for a presenter, but it's in all facets of not just the leadership, but the staffs of a lot of these organizations are predominantly white. And you have programs and things like you're doing that are going out into underrepresented communities, low-income underrepresented communities, with a lot of people that don't have a real direct connection to that. But I wonder what you all feel about building another pipeline for these students that do not become members of the Chicago Symphony, but making them aware of different opportunities in the performing arts and arts administration, and so that we can have the leadership and the staffs reflect that better. Could you all just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
Can I just start by saying that that's such an important question, and I don't, pretend to have the answer for it. But for me, that speaks especially to the importance of systemic, high-quality instrumental music instruction in public schools throughout the United States. So if there are millions and millions and millions of children in this country learning to play instruments, maybe a 0.1% become professional musicians. But the other 99.9%, right, become our audiences, become our staff members, become our board members, become our donors, because of the experience, the personal experience they've had playing musical instruments. So I think the effort right now is about how do we change the stage diversity, but immediately following, actually right now, we need to be talking about that bigger, broader group of folks in this country who need access and opportunity, which we heard a lot yesterday, those two words, access and opportunity for every child in this country. So.
Totally agreed. I think it's a huge issue. And we're working on it in a couple of little ways. Within NYO, there are apprentice roles. There's an apprentice librarian role, an apprentice orchestra management role, 2 apprentice conductors, and 2 apprentice composers. So built into the program, I mean, that's a small number of young people, but that's one thing that we've done. And at Carnegie Hall, New York City has been talking a lot about this lately, and issues of diversity and representation within staffs, within boards, within, at every level of cultural institutions. And so we're in a big conversation about building a much more robust internship program and fellowship program at the Hall across the whole organization that will really be focused on trying to, provide those kinds of opportunities for young people who don't normally get into those internships. If you only have free unpaid internships, for example, that's going to pretty quickly narrow the pool of people who can, get that foot in the door, which we all know is so important. So we're working on that too, but I completely agreed. It is a major, major issue, and we have work to do on it.
We have a red light flashing at us. I think we do. Our time, is that correct? That we need to wrap up. First, I'd like to thank our extraordinary panelists for your great comments, your responses. So thank you very much.
you all.
And to congratulate Sphinx on their 20th anniversary, and thank all of you for being here. Thanks.